One of the most common property questions you get is how much capital do I need to get started in property? And the answer is it depends. It depends on whether you want to make active income and if you want to make passive income. Now, what's the difference between active income? Active income is leveraging your time. Passive income is leveraging your money. Now, let's start with active income. Now, technically, if you want to make active income, you can start for free because all you need to do is put in the work. Now, technically, your time has a value, so it's not free. But what you'll need is you'll need a network. You'll need people who provide you with deals. You need clients and investors that buy, and you'll need to have the templates, the contracts, and the resources to get started. Now, technically, you can find clients and buyers for free online. If you don't know how to do that, watch my video here on the fastest way to make your first £3,000 in 30 days. And you need to get deals. Now, deals you can find online as well, but you need credibility. And if you're going to be investing on those deals, that's passive income, you need capital. So technically, it's free to find deals and find investors other than what I would say the investment of your education. Now, obviously, I have a mentoring program and that does cost a few £1,000s. So you could look at the cost of your education as your investment. However, if you choose the right program, it can pay dividends. Well, I've got some students who've made their investment back 10 times over in such a quick time because we provide them with education, network, as well as deals, as well as investors. So the key thing here, when you're doing active income, you need deals and you need buyers. If you get into the right circle, the right network, that can provide both. If you decide to start by yourself, you might be able to start for completely free. Obviously, you still need your compliance, your anti-money laundering, your insurances, your ICO, and you need to be part of a Regis scheme. That should all be on the screen here. And that does cost a few £1,000s. If you work with someone who has this, they might be able to pay you a referral fee, finding them deals. So you can think about that when leveraging when to start. Now, let's look at passive income. Now, typically, people believe if they want passive income, they need to buy a property and rent it out. And usually that was the only way that was available to people. And that would typically require an investment of 25 or 50,000 if you're looking in London, maybe a bit less if you're looking outside. Now, what we actually do for quote unquote passive income, because like I say, there's no such thing as passive income, only income that's passive off the back of someone else's activity. But what we do is we leverage rent to rents. Now, what is a rent to rent? It's renting a property from a landlord who's open and happy for you to rent as a company, then you rent it out to a different clientele. Now, we first started with service accommodation. If you want to know how I made my first £10,000 rent to rent, then there should be a video here. So we first started with service accommodation, which is more commonly known to people as AirBnBs, which was international clients, people from Emirates, people from European Union, people from China, people who came and they stayed for short terms in accommodation. We then evolved, whilst keeping that, into what we call social housing, which is essentially the same thing, short-term accommodation, but you're dealing more with corporates, governments, and insurance as opposed to individuals, if that makes sense. So these types of things require capital investments. Why? Because you're acquiring properties. You're not buying the properties, but there's a cost investment that goes into the lease, which is usually typically 1, 2, or 3 months rent. You need the deposits. You need any fees if you're paying sourcing fees. If you're finding deals yourself, obviously you won't have to pay sourcing fees. If you're finding a deal from someone else, you need sourcing fees. So typically when I talk to people about getting started with a rent to rent investment, whether it be social housing, service accommodation, I typically say they need about 5,000 to 10,000 to get passive income. And how do those numbers stack in terms of returns? If you're investing about £5,000, then I've got students who invested £5,000 in deals with us together where I provide the contract and they're cash flowing anywhere between £400 to £500 a month. And I've got investors who invested about £10,000 in deals and those deals have cash flowed about £1,000 per month. So those are the typical starting figures. Now, 5K is on the low side. That is literally the property's coming furnished. You're not paying a saucer. You're getting maybe no deposit. That's, straight raw hustler mindset, getting in for 5,000. Typically, I tell people if you want to invest and get passive income, then start closer to the 10K. And again, I'm not taking into account the cost of your investment education. And people might think, oh, I don't want to invest in education. But if you get into something and you're making a mistake that costs you £5,000, what was the point of making a £5,000 mistake when you could have made a £5,000 investment in a network, knowledge, education, and mentorship, which would have paid you back that dividend and you still had that support? Whereas when you make £5,000 on a mistake, all you've got is a very expensive lesson, no after support. So that's typically how much it needs to get started. If you're talking about active income, budget around 1,000, 2,000 for compliance or education. If you're talking about passive income, then budget around 5,000 to 10,000. So if you've got anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000, I would say you're ready in the region of being able to get started. If you've got less than 5,000, you can get started. I've got students who had less than 5,000 and we've been able to give them education to get started. However, I'm not going to lie, the more capital you have, the more you can accelerate your journey. You can have more one-to-one time, you can get more deals, you can leverage more. So 5,000 to 10,000 is ideally if you want to take on a property. If you're not taking on a property, you want active income, anywhere between 1,000 to 5,000 is a sweet spot to get started. So I hope that answers the question of how much capital do you need to get started, and this is for rent to rent and deal sourcing. Thank you. Check out those videos on the fastest way to get into property and how I made my first £10,000 in rent to rent. And then if you want to watch a success story of someone doing these things, then go to the bio to watch a podcast success story with one of my students talking about it. If you want to figure out how we can work one-to-one, then go to the comments and check out that link as well. Abdul Kareem from Ace Investment Properties. Look forward to seeing you in the next video.